The disclaimer one more time. This always keeps us on the safer side.
Thank you.
Yes.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And again, as always, we thank you, Alex, for joining us, as we thank all the knowledge seekers for being here and adding to the field strength. And now, here's Alex. Welcome, Alex. Let's see what you have in store for us today.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and beautiful presentation so far this beautiful Sunday. And just looking at the panel, we can see what makes the North American team meeting so strong. It's the representation from the rest of the world. It's just a few of us here in North America. We just have a very small population, and it's, hard to have an impact on world affairs. But I digress. This is a beautiful Sunday, so thank you all for being here. And let's see if we can understand Mr. Marantava-Kodakesh's plasma science a little bit better. That's what we're trying to do. And so this is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We have advanced to the intermediate inner space. And yeah, we have some tough choices to make. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is February the 12th, 2023. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And so we have pursued this inner space reality to try and get a bearing on that. And this followed the Earth Space series. And we covered some ground on the inner space. And we seem to be racing through this intermediate series. We're already in the 5th class of this set. And we have to make some tough choices now because we're really coming to a critical point in the program here. And so our understanding as we see it, we see that the universe is a friendly place. And so part of that friendliness has to do with the three amigos, which we've seen that the soul of the earth has the same three amigos as the soul of the man. And that is the soul of the earth body, and the physical earth body. And so we see that the culmination of these three amigos is the same, whether it's earth space or man space. It just depends on your point of view. And here we are trying to understand inner space. And of course, we're still looking for outer space. We haven't found it yet. That's really the whole purpose of this what we're trying to achieve here, because, and assuming that we can achieve it, right? We have targeted our search And so let's look at the source, which is book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matters. And shall we say the destination being our soul, which comes from the origin of the universe. That's as shown in book number 3. And then, of course, in between there is that link as shown in book number 2, The Structure of the Light. And then you see, well, what have we achieved beyond that little sentimental pie in the sky, which amounts to just that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner of the universe? And we see, in comparison to the rest of the universe, my, we have been preoccupied for millennia with schemes so small you barely can see them. In fact, in many times, it's completely invisible. And, you know, man's purpose and man's effect on this planet is basically just non-existent. But it's not non-existent because each of us, from our own point of view, are looking at our position in man space. But we see in that man space that we have different plasma energy levels. And so basically we have soul levels, emotional levels, and physical levels. But that's just us, isn't it? What we have to understand is that it's us as a relationship to something else. But before we can get to that something else, we have to understand our man space. And so the 3 amigos are really the 3 plasma souls. The souls are plasma. Soul of the man, soul of the body, and the soul of the cells. And then there's the physicality, the man body. And then there's the physicality of the earth body. And so our point of view is our man space, but by extension, our point of view is the earth space as well, because the earth was in our target. And we all hit that target. And we all hit that target uniquely. Your target was not my target. So we all seem to get along. And yet, look what we had to come through. We had to come through the sun space, and we could have deflected off into moon space, but we didn't. We came right to earth space, and then someplace on earth space, not in the magnosphere or not in the magnetosphere, but in the biosphere range, where the majority of life exists. And when we say life, we're talking about the physical life, isn't it? Because that's how we see our life. And so we understand that this position is based on density, and that position is between the moon space magnetical boundary and the earth space gravitational boundary, which actually is at the core, isn't it? So we see that the soul of the earth body is this biosphere range, and the soul of the earth is in the core. And so we see the comparison between the differentiated positions and the non-differentiated positions, and how that relates to our cell structure. So all of this kind of works together. And that's not all there is, isn't it? Because we occupy this space with vertical people and other horizontal people as well. And are those the only people? So we are preparing now for flight tests to the moon. And, you know, we just assume it's our moon, right? And we're talking about physical flight. But, you know, we have a whole bunch of moons out there. And so when we talk about the race to the moon, we have to be a little bit more specific. And the thing that when we look at the number of moons that are available in our immediate solar system as far as we know, or as far as we say we know. We see that there are trends and there's sequences, but really it depends on, are you looking at the size of the planet? Are you looking at the position of the planet with relationship to the sun? Is there a trend there, or is there a sequence there? Or is it a sequence that we really don't see? Because, for instance, the Uranus and Neptune are kind of wet planets, and Jupiter and Saturn are kind of gaseous planets, and then Mars, Earth, and Venus. And Mercury, they're kind of physical. So, what is that sequence? And is that the sequence that you make your choice on? So when we got into the solar system space, we had this range. We had to go past all of these other moons, including our own moon, just to get to this Earth space. So we see that there's a way that this was done, and it was done using the plasma energy. So when people ask you, and a lot of people are going to ask you, is what is plasma? And you just have to tell them it's a kind of energy state, and there are different kinds of energy state. And understanding these energy states is really understanding our Earth space. And once we understand that, then we can find our inner space sequence, because that's the key to and the gateway to outer space. And so where is outer space? And that question has been very elusive, along with many other questions. And so we find that this question is extremely important. And, you say, well, if that is not considered important, then nothing is important, except possibly today the Super Bowl. That's pretty important. I just wonder if after next week, they will need to huddle before they run a play. This is a North American joke. So we were talking about emotions, and there are many different emotions. So did we know that there's a variety of emotions? And so we've been concentrating lately on the emotion of position, because how is that emotion of position different from the emotion of presence? Because hello, we're here, I'm here, you're here, that's our position, but that's our position in the presence. And wherever we are and whenever we are, we will be present. Is that the determining factor? Is that what we make our choice by? Really, the emotion of presence is a manifestation of a choice, a predetermination. Predetermination is done prior to determination. So we have to follow the rules, and as such, there are plasma rules. So it's very important to understand these rules and what it means exactly, because, so first of all, there are different energy states, and we can increase or decrease these energy states. But unlike steps in a stairway, we can jump 10 steps at a time. So each set of 10 steps is an order of magnitude. But as we all know, if you are coming at the top of the stairs and you miss a step, you might go all the way down. But in reality, we have to understand that it's an energy state, and another is a lower energy state. And it has nothing to do with falling or rising. It has to do with feeding. And so in that process of feeding, if we rise, we call that natural creation. But if we lower, then we call that natural decay. And either way, any change will manifest into this, except that there is a catalytic or a non-consuming transfer of energy. And the nearest thing that we can look at, of course, is the sun. We say that the sun provides the energy constantly and is not being consumed. And so we look at the earth then, because we're here, that the earth is being consumed, and so we have limited resources. And so we have a differentiation between renewable and non-renewable energy sources, ignoring the fact, of course, that at some point in time they were created. So we find that whether it's a renewable or non-renewable is a transfer rate change, and that transfer rate can be done by many orders of magnitude. So I think we're having some trouble understanding our science. And so we have to look at the plasma science and understand that there are two factors. There's the absorption of fields, and there's a barrier of fields. And so the common denominator is the field. And so we have to take that into account when we're discussing physics. But not only, because something happens to these fields when we violate the ethos of the universe. It stops working. And so we find that plasma is bound to the ethos of the universe. And so, historically speaking, we've made our choice. And the choice has been to ignore the universe. But, you know, we've never been able to replicate the universe except by other physical means. And so we look at, say, how rotation affects a field, and the field can manifest from this rotation, and the speed of the rotation affects the field's strength. And so that's how you get a relationship between different fields. And it's that relationship that determines which field feeds the other field. And so this is how we find that, you know, what's going on with all the moons that are out there. And you find that some are rotating one way and some are rotating another way, and some don't rotate at all. And like our moon, it's just a wobbler. And so that rotational direction is in relation to its planet, isn't it? So we have to take that into account. So when we look at our planet and we see, well, it has a northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and they rotate in opposite directions, but that's plasmatically. And the manifestation in the physical is that it all rotates in one direction. So the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but it's not the sun that's doing the rising and the setting, it's the fact that the earth is turning. And so this imparts a gravitational stability with respect to the earth. That's why it rotates. It's gravitationally stable. This is an important point. And so the speed of relation is affected by these field relations. And so when you have different field strengths, you have to accommodate. And so when we look at our Earth space, we see that it's kind of an energy state. And it is a very gravitationally stable energy state. And we have found that we can transcend multiple energy states. We don't have to go step by step. And so we can do that in Earth space. We can do that in man space. So definitely we can do that in plasma space, except we have to understand that the plasma binding is bound to the ethos of the universe. And therefore, seeing as we don't have the capability of manifesting the Earth space, we have to depend on the plasma energy of the Earth space and its binding force to achieve that gravitational stability, isn't it? This becomes very important. So when we look at the surface to volume ratios and we see how 1 + 1 is more than 2. And it kind of defies the basic math that we learned in school. But fundamentally, there are 2 feeding dimensions and a third feedback dimension. And so it's more than 2 because you still have the feeding dimensions. You cannot stop the feeding dimensions and maintain the feedback dimension. It's not possible. You have to continually feed this dimension, and then you have to respond to the feedback to that dimension. Well, then none of those dimensions are our dimension because we're seeing the feeding and we're seeing the feedback. So we're in another dimension, and this is part of the problem. So everything that we're looking at is just basically in these 3 dimensions. And so the reality dimension is not really a place, because every place we look is a place, but outer space is not a place. It's a method of energy transfer. And so this leads us to energy in motion and how the universe was created, because it exists from energy. And this is discussed in the Universal Order of Creation of Matters, which is the title of book number 1. And you see on the cover 3 different energy states coming together to have one energy state. And if 1 and 1 is more than 2, well, here we have 3. So it's 1 + 1 + 1 equals 3. But does it? Because energy is always in motion. And if energy is in motion, it has to be in motion to somewhere. And if it's going somewhere, that means it has to come from somewhere. And so all these things are in combination. And so the limitation of this energy in combination is not just a one particular energy state, but we can have a relationship between multiple energy states. And how do you choose? How do you choose which energy state? So in simple matter, we say that the 2 forces come together to create another. And so we bring these 2 forces together to create this 3 dimension, which in our case is the planet. But really, it's not just a planet, it's us, it's our man space. But in order for our man space to be somewhere, we have to choose our planet. And so we've chosen our Earth space. And so that is the point of how we came into existence. But how do we maintain that existence? And so the same principle applies. We still have the 2 forces coming together. So this is the harvesting of the universal energies, and it enhances us. And so we do this automatically. And it's really a good thing that it's done automatically, because if it was left up to us, we would really be in a jackpot. And the only reason we are even talking about a jackpot is because there's some people who are stealing that energy. Why create the energy, or why harvest the energy when I can steal it from someone else? And so this loose harvesting, which is the stealing of energy from others, actually ends up being a self-consumption, because that becomes their excess baggage. So I hope they're enjoying that excess baggage that they've accumulated over a period of time, because energy is precious. And so we have to see, well, where does this energy originally come from? And so it's an energy parceling unit, which we call PM ticks. And that's part of the magnetical feeding of the universe. And it comes together into the principal transition and convergence matter, which we see converted into a plasma gen. Well, this plasma gen has to have a reference point. And so that reference point becomes our planet. And so our planet is feeding back to us the success. But how does that manifest? And so it has to manifest through a field interaction we call inertia. That's the product. And so each of these, the feeding is a maggrav, the feedback is a maggrav, and the inertia field is a maggrav. And all of these are non-visible, non-tangible, until we arrive at the destination. So what we're seeing is that our position is between, in simple terms, between the sun and the earth, isn't it? Because we're on the surface of the earth. But what we need to understand is that this energy in motion is actually a two-way street. You know, we say feeding and feedback. Yeah, well, feeding and feeding back what? Energy. And it's a two-way street. And now we see that this is a street of equality. So that street of equality becomes the pathway that we have to follow. But which equality reference do we choose? Because clearly the sun and the earth are not equal, except that they're both gravitationally stable. So the equality is in the gravitational stability. And is one superior to the other? Well, we're not living on the sun, we're living on the earth. So although the earth is not physically superior to the sun, it is our preference point, isn't it? And so we have to choose our equality reference point. And so many of us don't really understand how to make these decisions. We don't always use the decisions properly because, you know, we're fascinated with a glow or a glitter or a flash, especially if it's a flash in the pan. But, you know, is it profitable? That's always the most important thing. But if it's not profitable, then we could be losing something, right? And are we giving our confidence to this losing? And are we, you know, we can't provide, the earth is too small, not too many people. We don't have enough energy, we don't have enough food. Who is making this plan? Who is embellishing this confidence in losing? Or is it a lack of confidence in creation? Or is it just simply a lack of gravitational stability? So somehow we're making choices to choose what do we account for or what do we discount for? And then, you know, what's the reward? And what does it entail? So is this normal? Is it like a blast or is it bountiful? Or is it a defect? This is a multiple choice question. Let's get to the core of the situation here. So we see that the maggrav condition on the cover of book number 1 is like an electron. It's also a PM tick. And so we deem it to be magnetical. But an electron is a component of an atom. It also has another component in there called a proton, and the relationship of the electron and the proton is gravitational. And that's a ray. And so we find that there is a affinity or similarity between PM ticks and rays. And then you're asking, is it plasmatic or is it physical? Well, at the core, it hasn't been determined. And so we have a case where we're looking for the gravitational stability to make that determination. So we have different types of molecules. We have physical molecules which contribute to the elements. We have chemical molecules which contribute to the products of the combination of elements. And then we have plasma molecules, which we call GANs. Gas is a nanosolid. And so these all end up being sequence providers. And the sequence providers are providing a sequence for transmutation. And so to go one step further, we have these plasma gas molecules, which we call inert gases. But we have to understand that there are physical gases and there are plasmatic gases. So when we talk about plasma gas molecules, we're talking about a plasmagen. So every physicality has a substructure of a plasmatic reality. And it is from that point that we can either choose natural creation or natural decay. So when we look at the fundamental principle of the twinity, this is kind of important because it gives us a reference of what to choose for. So we have this plasma of the electron, and we have this plasma of the proton. And it's the larger plasma of the proton which can feed the smaller plasma of the electron. But did we say twinity? So the electron and the proton are twins. They don't look like twins. One seems to be bigger than the other. In fact, 1,849 times bigger. But the combination together creates a unit called an atom. So this means that sequences have a factor. And what is the result of that factor is that we can alter our feeding. So in other words, turn it on and turn it off, or our strength, either increase or decrease the strength. And this all affects our positioning. And so we can either be in a better position or in a weaker position. But that's not a commentary on the positioning. That's just a positioning of the positioning, a relationship. Because that relationship affects the feeding and the strength. So all three are intimately involved. And this is all part of the Kesh model of the nuclear decay of the neutron, because we see here we have a neutron that's gravitationally stable. And then we have this atom, which is gravitationally stable between the electron and the proton. But there's this release of the PM ticks. And you know what? These PM ticks are also stable. But the problem is that they're not gravitational. They're magnetical. And so these become very important reference points. And so what it means is that these rays can be emitted, or these rays can be absorbed, and they can be launched from one field and land on another field. But we didn't say which field, and we didn't say which energy state. But what we also didn't say is at which speed of light. We're just saying it's at light speed. So there's a difference, because there's something that we can see and something that we can't see. And that's the plasmatic spectrum versus the physicality spectrum. So if the plasma is a substructure of the physicality, then there has to be this bond in between. And that is the reality dimension that is keeping this together. Because we're able to transcend the various energy states, remember? And so what energy state do we take in? There has to be some kind of filter. We say it's a sequence, or is it out of sequence? So, you know, heaven forbid you damage your nose, but where you did the damage, you grow more toes. And so the repair, is that done from the feeding or is it done from the feedback? And what is the lasting effect? Can we undo that effect? In other words, can we restore the sequence to its natural sequence? So what are we made of? So we use x-rays to check out what we're made of. And the x-rays are actually a gravitational field effect because they see our substructure. It's a materialization effect, isn't it? But it's a very selective seeing, isn't it? And how do we know this? Because what are we looking for when we look for x-rays? We're looking for that visible disease effect. As the gentleman once told me, he's perfectly healthy except for a little bit of diabetes. And I guess, you know, he can say that because I can't see his diabetes. But there's other questions. Because when we look at the x-rays, we can see the gravitational field effect, but we can't see the cells. We don't see the individual cells. We don't see the energy exchange between them. As a matter of fact, we don't see the water that's in there. We don't see the elements, and we don't see the blood either. So it's a very selective seeing. So what we are seeing is the manifestation of the illness. Or shall we say the gravitational manifestation of the bone structure. What we're not seeing is the communication. What we're not seeing is the plasmatic substructure. All we're seeing is the form artifact. So there's an unseen communication stability because it has created this gravitational stability of the bone structure and of the disease. So that part is stable, but there was another stability that was created as a cancer. And so we're seeing that, but we're not seeing the communication stability that has caused that. And it's kind of interesting because we haven't seen the x-rays either. We've only seen the result. So what we're seeing is that this manifestation point where we see the one, our bodies and one, the x-rays coming together to create this field. It shows what we are and it shows what we aren't. But it doesn't show us the gateway, does it? It doesn't show us how we got there because clearly under your skin, there's a lot more going on than what you can see with the x-ray. So there are different dimensions. There's a physical dimension and there's a plasmatic dimension. So it's the plasmatic dimension, which is the feeding dimension. But not only, it could also be the feedback dimension, but we can extend that to the physical dimension. So the physical dimension is a feedback of the plasmatic dimension. But depending on your point of view, one of these dimensions is going to be dominant. And we've been clearly focused on the wrong dimension. And we've extended that to our genetic feeding. And so we can have a genetic plasma feeding, or we can have a genetic physical modification. And so it's not just a matter of which is the common denominator, but which is the common defect denominator. So when we re-evaluate how we got here, we see that, excuse me, we were very specific. We got here by some kind of communication channel, and we were specifically tuned in to a specific planet positioning. And we have all of these choices. But what about these other planets? And what about the moons of these planets? They all had their own channel, and they're all tuned into their own channel. Well, this is good. This is really good, because the Earth is gravitationally stable, and Jupiter is gravitationally stable, and we are gravitationally stable, and we're not on Jupiter, we're on Earth. So this is good, because we all like to have our feet firmly planted on the ground, as opposed to dangling in the gas somewhere. So we see that one of the problems that we have, all these planets, we measure the distances of these planets in a different kind of reference. We don't measure it by distance. We measure it by the speed of light. And we don't say which light, because we only measure it by the light that we see. But it doesn't explain for time, because our time is relevant to the distance times the inversion of the speed. And so it takes many, many light years, and we can't travel at the speed of light, right? Well, if you can't travel at the speed of light, think about this. If you can see that planet, your vision has transcended that distance immediately. So you can go there, but you can't go there at the speed of your vision. So is your speed of the vision the same as the speed of the light? Because clearly the speed of your travel is nowhere near the speed of your light. But if with the new science that we can do this instantaneously, then we must be traveling faster than the speed of light, because we don't see how we get there. And if we can get to any place instantaneously, then the reference of the different distances doesn't add up. How can there be different distances if the travel to all of these places is at the same speed? And is it so? So I can give you an answer like most university professors will give you. I don't know. So should we drop that subject? Or should we start looking at how do we transcend the limitations of this science, which we call nuclear science? So we find that the plasma science is tuned into the ethos of the universe. And we know that there's a morality, there's a compassion, there's a courage, and these are all components, not the only components, but these are all part of creation. And say, well, the creation of what? Well, the most important things is our man space, right? That's really important. And then, of course, our man space has to take into account Earth space, because we all have to be someplace. So now that we're here, wherever we are, we have to choose our feeding method. And too many of us are choosing to feed the method to, excuse me, too many of us are choosing the method to feed at the expense of others, right? Because it's not only is it easier, but because of the unique references that we have on this earth field, we have this delay in consequences as opposed to outer space travel, which is instantaneous. So if we had these consequences instantaneously, we would think twice about stealing from others, wouldn't we? Because the moment you steal, you would get caught, and you don't want to get caught, so you don't steal. But is that the motivation? If that's the motivation, the fear of what you don't want, and that's kind of a negative thing. And in terms of plasma energy, it doesn't exist. The negativity is a charge in motion. The plasma energy is positive. And so there are connections and there are dimensions. And what are these dimensions? Well, one set of dimensions is our three amigos, the soul of the man, the soul of the body, and the soul of the cells. And it is from there that we adapt. But what is the criteria for this adaptation? So is it just physical, or does it involve emotions? And do we get to choose which connections? Do we choose, are we man-centric? Are we earth-centric? Are we solar system-centric? Or are we universal-centric? And so whichever centric it is this manifestation point where two fields come together to form another. And depending on whether it's tangible or non-tangible, or visible or non-visible, is whether or not it's plasmatic or physical. But there's this other reality, which is the emotion of presence. And that is because the physical reality is a form artifact, and the emotion of presence is a form artifact. And it's a form artifact of energy and motion at that manifestation point. And so if energy is always in motion, then the manifestation of energy in motion if the physical reality is dependent on the plasmatic reality, then the manifestation point of energy in motion is also in the plasmatic reality. So what is our position in this physical reality? And the same question applies, what is our position in that plasmatic reality? And do we have a choice? Or are we, victims? And what exactly are we doing while we're making this choice? So we find that our existence has a radiance. And so that radiance is a feeding from our inner space. And so our position, wherever we are, is determined by a feedback radiance. And so we absorb that. And that contributes to our inner space spectrum. And so it can be a physical manifestation, but it always has to be a plasmatic manifestation. And so that manifestation is an inner space point within an inner space field. And so we ask, can we be in two different places at the same time? And Herman Wales says, a definite portion of matter occupies a definite part of space at a definite moment of time. So there's no such thing as one and the same energy, which constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. So you can't be in two places at the same time. But a portion can be. So in order for a portion of you to be a part of you, there has to be a connection. And if there's a connection, there has to be a flow of energy. So now we understand the principles of flow and connection. And we wonder if, those stupid Atlanteans knew this before us smart Westerners. And then you see how organized the Atlanteans were, because they understood the 64 triple base codons of the DNA and RNA. And how many years ago was that? It must have been before the Great Flood. So this RNA modification that we're seeing is an adaptation from the universal energies that are being universally supplied over a universal period of time. And so it affects our inner space spectrum. And it's our inner space spectrum becomes the feeding radiance, right? And so what is the feedback? So we see that the earth space is the feedback of the universal energies and is feeding back to our inner space spectrum. And why is that? Why is that possible? So we see that the basic elemental constituents of the earth space is the same as that of man space. We adopt that, and then we adapt to that. So if we're not taking care of that feedback, let's say we somehow screw this up, heaven forbid, what exactly would be feeding back? So what is the purpose of the feedback? Is it to say that the feeding radiance is deficient? So the feeding radiance created the DNA, but if we change the pH of our environment, and let's say our environment is alkaline, overly alkaline, we'll find that the DNA will contract. There's a certain point, there's a point of reference in a healthy DNA at a certain pH. But if we're living in an unhealthy environment, what we call acidic, then what makes us unhealthy is that the DNA literally extends. And how far does it extend? Well, we find that it can keep extending and keep extending until it becomes a flat line. And once it becomes a flat line, well, you don't have to worry about it, okay? Because you're dead. So the thing is how do we maintain this gravitational stability? And so do we want to conquer this outer space? Well, we don't even know where it is. We've never been there. So, do we really want to pursue that avenue? Because it doesn't answer where our soul came from or the soul of the body. And in fact, it doesn't even account for the physical manifestation of the body. It doesn't explain why the earth rotates but doesn't walk, but man walks but doesn't rotate. But we all want to be the lord of our castles. And the moment you think in those terms, you're talking about a master-slave relationship. And are you the master or are you the slave? And so if you're making that choice, well, who doesn't want to be the master? But are you the master? Or are you the slave? And what is that relationship that you're looking at? So it's hard for us to conquer outer space because we've never found it. There's no proof of it. What we have found is sun space, planet space, moon space, and that in between space someplace. But we haven't conquered outer space because we're too busy conquering our neighbors and robbing and stealing from them. So what we're still talking about is these relationships. And so there's a scientific community of physicality, there's a spiritual community of non-physicality, and then there's the plasma science, which transcends them both. And then if we can combine those two, we can affect the rate of change. Because when we look historically, well, there hasn't been any change. Man has been at war with someone somewhere pretty much all the way through history. So how do we find this peace? Because we're looking for this peace and we can't find it because it's at this point of existence, which we call transmutation, and it's not visible because it's in a balanced condition, it's in a peaceful condition. But we know that existence exists because, hello, we're here. That's our confirmation. That's our confirmation via this connection across this no man's land, which is between our physical reality and our plasma reality. But which plasma reality? Is it the diminishing plasma reality or is it the enhanced plasma reality? And where exactly is our physical reality? And are we only limited to this physical reality? Or is this a fabricated limitation that we've placed on the soul because we can't see the rest of it? It's not visible to us. Well, the plasma feeding rule is that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And the magnetical field forces of attraction and repulsion come into play. We call them gravitational and magnetical field forces. They represent the feeding and the feedback principles that maintain any energy state. And so we find that the gravitational stability of energy in motion is so stable in terms of existence, but not determined. It's undifferentiated in the position of its transcendence. So this gravitational stability of an energy feeding back can transcend the different reality dimensions. And wherever it goes is a magnetical energy in motion. And where does it go? Well, it has to make some choices. And so those are based on rotation, speed, strength, and direction. And there's a couple of others, like whether it's a polar energy, where we have the emission, or it's an absorption, and is the absorption exclusively by poles, or is it throughout the field? And so every relationship has to have a magnetical gravitational balance. And so a balance implies a non-directional movement, which is impossible. Movement has to be in a certain direction. So the balance point between the magnetical and the gravitational is the direction plus the speed of travel. And so we find that this transfer of energy is actually an emotional transfer. We see that with our ganses, because we could clearly see through the glass bottle that it's transparent, but it's physical. We can see the gans, and there's a hole in the gans. So we can't see that. That's transparent, but we know it's there. And that was created by a rotating field. Well, we can't see the rotating field either. So the manifestation of the hole in the gans is actually a feedback. And the creation of the gans is a feeding byproduct. So the relationship between the ganses and the emotion is a feedback of a feeding byproduct process of a process. If that sounds like double talk, you have to understand there are boundaries, and these boundaries either absorb energy or they're a barrier of energy. And so we look at the cups of life, and you could say, well, the reason these are cups is because they create a field with boundaries. But something has transcended those boundaries. There's an emotional strength in that core space, and it creates this inner space field where we are able to see the results of these details of the earth space, and the details of our man space, our physicality. But these are just the details, the elemental products that create the ganses. And so we just see that the ganses are molecular in nature as combinations. CO2 gans, calcium gans, copper gans, zinc gans, amino acid gans, water gans. Yes, they're all ganses, but they're all at different field strengths, aren't they? And they're also at different complexities. And are they coming or are they going? Well, in the cups of life, they were coming. And once you have the product, now what do you have? Well, you have a Maggrav condition. So each cup is a magnetical gravitational Maggrav condition, which with the soul in the center that gives its position. But the combination of the three, the soul and the emotion and the physicality, gives you another gravitational stability of another cup, the cup of the man space. And then, of course, there's a relationship cup, the cup of inertia, and it too is gravitationally stable. But where did that come from? Well, that comes from the interaction with the cup of man with the cup of the earth. And the cup of the earth is also gravitationally stable. So now we have three gravitationally stable fields coming together to create another gravitationally stable field, the five cups. And so it goes. And so what is the difference between the five cups that we create, the cups of life, and the, let's say, the universal enhancement units? Well, probably 400 different ganses. So it's far more complex. And so we know from previous classes that the more complex it is, the more stable it is, the more gravitationally stable. And so that becomes your binding energy path, where you absorb energy and more energy done through attraction, what you call gravitational attraction. And so now we've created a susceptibility where we can actually emit energy. This is part of the repulsion, the magnetical repulsion, where we give energy out and more out. And because it's giving, that changes our susceptibility also. these two work together. So this is part of the feeding dimension, where energy is coming in and more energy is coming in and energy is going out and more energy is going out. But we have this energy that just passes right on through. And so is this a defect, or is this a deficiency, or is this to be announced? Because when you look at the universe, we see that there is a dynamic plasma relationship. So we just look at it from our own point of view, and that could be our man-space point of view, or it could be our Earth-space point of view. But from that point, there's a transmission, right? And so that transmission comes from that inner space point within our inner space field. But, you know, where does it go? So if you look at the sun space and we see, well, you know, the sun space point within the sun space field is transmitting to others, but which others? It's unconditional. It is transmitting all the time. And it is not being consumed. And it is not consuming. It's catalytic. It's a dynamic plasma relationship. And so the only modification that we're having is based on our environment. And so we have to ask, you know, is this predictable, or is it a violation of man space somehow? Or is there an emotional relationship? And is it, you know, just man space and compared to some other space, part of Earth space, someplace on Earth space, or some other space? Or is it a competition between the Earth space and the physical space? Or just some space, inner space? Or some physical space? Or are we managing this thing, our inner space versus outer space? Which means our outer space becomes transmutation to some other space. And so all of this is reflected in our emotional positioning, isn't it? This affects our environmental position. This is all part of the environmental modification. That is to say, the emotional positioning affects our environment. And so this becomes the energy of the dynamic plasma, the feeding radiance and the feedback radiance that passes through the reality dimension. And in what dimension does it go in? Does it go in the physical dimension, or does it go in the emotional dimension? And if it is a dimension, at what energy state is it? Because at whatever energy state it is, it has to have the basic 3 dimensions. In other words, the soul of the earth body, the biosphere, and the core, the soul of the earth, the 3 amigos. And so we are already on heaven. And we came here healthy. And so we see there's a gravitational stability of the earth, and there's a gravitational stability of the cells. We are not preoccupied with making sure that the earth rotates, or that the sun comes up in the morning, or whether, you know, a certain cell in our kidney is functioning properly. It's done automatically for us, and it's all done the same way. So there's a resolution to this anomaly and how our relationship is with Earth. So the whole thing about searching for outer space is the difference in this manifestation. So the plasmatic manifestation is ongoing all the time. But if it becomes physical, that's materialization. And so we now have a choice. we already know that we can materialize, although we don't know how. And we already know that we can dematerialize, but we don't know how. So we know that there's a here, there's a there, and there's a connection in between. But now we have a choice, because now we understand that the soul of the man is the essential you, and that's functioning as an interaction between the plasmagen state and the mattergen state and the soul of the body. Well, that's the surrogate you, right? Because that is interacting with the plasmagen state and the environment state. Which environment state did you choose? And so that contributes to your emotional stability, doesn't it? So we see that the earth rotates, it doesn't walk, but man walks and doesn't rotate. And so to maintain this stability, we have to rotate some other way. And we do this with a crossover. This gives us our emotional stability, where the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And having said that, where the brain controls the body, then where does the reproduction side come in? You know, because part of the production or the reproduction, you know, the brain, that's affecting the body, but the body has two lungs and two organs or organ pair relations, like the heart and the liver. But then there's this emotion that's between a male and a female. And so is that home, that emotion between the male and the female? Is that what's affecting the emotion of position? We need to examine this, because it's causing a problem, or has caused a problem, right? I kill your son grows up, revenge kills me. My son now wants to seek revenge, kills you. Your son sees this, grows up, kills my son. That's the extreme part of it. So in between is this marriage body between daddy and mommy, right? Because there's the courageous testosterone man and the courageous estrogen woman. But we find that there's testosterone in both and estrogen in both. So it becomes testosterone dominant, estrogen dominant. And so it's not a matter of which is dominant, it's a matter of cooperation. But that cooperation is based on our understanding of the contest between the context. And to understand it's not a competition. But is it? Is it a competition? Well, when you introduce a child, well, you're not mommy and daddy, you're parents. And interesting enough, 1 + 1 is more than 2, but in this case it's 3, isn't it? Because mommy and daddy are still there. So 1 and 1 is now 3. But is it? Because now you could have another child. And so whether it's 2 sons or daughters or one of each, you get into this sibling context now. And so people say, well, blood is thicker than water. Well, okay, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good scientific analysis. But we all understand that blood is a carrier of emotion, and so is water. So that's kind of a nice argument. But the implication really is that the bond between the family members is the strongest. So if you come between me and my family, you will have to pay somehow. And it could get ugly. And then, of course, there's always the ultimate. So let's look at this, where from a father's perspective, is the relationship with the son greater than that of the daughter? Or from the point of view of the mother, is her relationship with the daughter stronger than that of the son? But the opposite could be true. And there are many, many variables here on this relationship. Okay, so that's pretty simple and straightforward. But, you know, when you look at that relationship of a man and a woman, you understand that there are grandparents. So there's grandparents on the man's side, there's grandparents on the woman's side. And the reason they are grandparents is because you end up with children. So the children become grandchildren. And so it all depends on the relationship and which level you're talking about. And so this becomes a very ordinary, organized family. And so we can see that with this family here right now, that there is a biological connection, isn't it? Because the son is a product of the grandparents, and the daughter is a product of the grandparents, and the grandchildren are offspring of the parents. So there's a biological connection. Good. Now we understand this stability within the family. We have a breakup in the family. So we're just going to change perspective here. And we're going to put ourselves in the position of grandparents, and we're going to say, well, there was a divorce. And so now in comes, well, in this case, let's say a daddy, another daddy. Well, is that daddy then assuming to be the daddy of the children? And then the children have children, which we call the grandkids. So all of a sudden now we have 2 grandmommies and 3 granddaddies. The children get divorced and the children get remarried. And there's a new daddy on the children's side. And then that marriage brings in another set of grandparents. So this is all part of the physical family. But would you say that that new set of grandparents that came in on the top right-hand corner, would they be grandparents to those grandkids on the bottom level? Or, wait, this new marriage has another child. So, in effect, you know, you have a sibling relationship with the grandkids, but not from the same marriage. And you have 4 granddaddies and 3 grandmommies, and you have 2 daddies and 1 mommy, and you have 3 different siblings. And so, quite rightly, there's no direct physical connection on all levels. The only thing that is common in terms of connection is the emotional connection. And is there an emotional connection? Does it follow? In other words, is that a mandatory connection? Or is that a connection of choice? What if the divorced daddy doesn't want to participate with the family anymore? In other words, that would be an emotional disconnection. And what if the non-biological daddy wanted to be part of the family? That would be an emotional connection. Well, if blood is thicker than water, which is to imply the family bond, is it specifically the biological family bond? Or does it include another bond? And so when we look at things, we have to understand the difference between what is being reflected and what is being emitted. So what we're looking at is the gene structure, isn't it? Because to clarify this as confusion, we have to see that, is it a disruption of the sequence or is it an alteration? And is it enduring or is it reversible? And so we find that there is a connection. We have to look at the connection. So when we're looking at family connection, the obvious connection criteria is physical. So there's a biological connection. That becomes the feeding connection. And so this biological connection also becomes reinforced with this legal connection. That becomes the feedback connection. So mommy and daddy could have a child out of wedlock or in wedlock, and that all depends on timing. But what about the emotional connection? So clearly, it doesn't matter how old your child is, it's always your child, and you always maintain this biological connection emotionally, even when, shall we say, the bird flies from the nest. So your child could be halfway around the world, you still have this biological connection, and it's done emotionally. That becomes a feeding connection. But what about if you're not biologically connected? What happens if you're just convenient? If you're just conveniently positioned and you assume an emotional position? That would be a family connection, and that would be a feedback. And so neither of these determine this maternal or paternal connection, which we see as a connection, the family connection between the egg and the sperm. So we know that the maternal connection is a feeding and the paternal connection is a feedback. But, what happens if the physical connection is severed? And then what happens if the emotional connection is severed? And can you reconnect that? Can that be modified, corrected? And which one dominates? So, which choice are you making? Are you making the physical connection choice, or are you making the emotional connection choice? Or is it a molecular connection between the two? Or do we go to the maternal connection, which sees the common RNA through all maternal beings? And so the paternal becomes just like a donor, which is to say the maternal is the universal feeding, the genetic connection universally, and the paternal is the donor feedback. And so if that is the case, then you say, well, 1 and 1 is more than 2. Well, clearly, 1 is not the same as the other one. Those are 2 different ones. And together, we can see that, well, there's more than 2. In fact, when the mommy daddy come together, not only can they create offspring, but they create grandparents at the same time. So this becomes a connection. And you see that the maternal connection through the RNA is a magnetical connection. The paternal connection is through the DNA, gravitational. What we're not saying. What are we not saying? It's neither physical, neither emotional. It's plasmatic. The genetic connection is plasmatic, and we have a choice. We have always had a choice. We've just never been aware that we've had a choice, and we've never known how, because we had a limit. We had a limit in the type of choices of the family choices. So, you have your biological family, and so that should be a very strong, gravitationally stable environment. But there's a defect in the emotional context, because familiarity breeds contempt as well. So familiarity, respect is gravitationally stable, but familiarity, contempt is destabilizing, causes a family breakup. And in the absence of the family, biologically, we tend to gang up. And what kind of gang? We do that emotionally, don't we? Because it's certainly not biologically, but it is physically. Then, of course, there's the global family, isn't it? Well, I guess it depends on your point of view. So really, the emotion of position is dependent on whether you've made a choice of a family choice of being either an adopted family or a universal family. Because let's face it, a parental family is not a biological connection. It's an emotional connection. It only becomes a biological connection in the presence of offspring. So a marriage is exclusively an emotional connection based on love. And a physical family is based on physicality, plus the emotional connection. So the emotional connection is mandatory in all cases, is a substructure of the physical connection. So now we understand why the plasma connection is always present and a substructure of the physical connection. So we see that, there's a point of conflict because we're seeing the difference between man-made law versus universal law. And there's no greater conflict than, well, it's not a competition. Any type of conflict is a tug of war between the physical and emotional positioning, isn't it? Whether it be a divorce or whether it be between countries or between religions, or maybe it's just a racial prejudice. So, how does the earthbound prejudice compare versus the interplanetary prejudice? And the reason I say that is because we're all prejudiced of Earth, but we seem to be kind of cavalier, in fact, saying, well, if we mess this place up, we can always go to Mars. Really? Is that where your emotion lies? You want to go to Mars? Well, next month that will be possible. But do you want to live there, or do you want to just visit? And so if we have this interplanetary prejudice, is that the same as a universal prejudice? Does the universe have a prejudice? So let's not confuse that kind of prejudice that we have on Earth with susceptibility. The susceptibility on the emission of magnetical charges and the absorption of gravitational charges is the susceptibility, and we get to choose. We get to choose how this works because the emotion of position impacts the emotion of presence, and the emotion of presence impacts the physicality. So we have a position of choice now. We know we have this gravitational stability on Earth. We are questioning our emotional stability on Earth because it's affecting our physical gravitational stability as man space. But if we can elevate into a higher position, if we understand that if we elevate into a point of magnetical stability, and the magnetical stability is derived from the gravitational stability and contributes to the gravitational stability, then we understand that we have a position of choice. We can be man-centric, earth-centric, sun-centric, solar system-centric, or there are other choices. So when we're looking at the peace stone, we have to understand that that is a field from which there is a giving and taking of energy. And what is our source of inspiration? And do we get to choose? Because are you a follower or are you a leader? And if that's a difficult question, imagine the leader who knows he's a leader. Who does the leader follow? So we all have to choose our source of inspiration, including the universal community. So here's the thing. The earth has already chosen. It has a peace stone, and it allows us to connect into it because the earth's gravitation is stable. And so the emotional stability comes right from the core of the earth. And so we can patch right into that. We have these choices because the biosphere of peace on this planet is the emotion of position. The earth has this emotion, and the majority of us are seeking and will answer this call of freedom and emancipation on this planet because there's a universal emotionally normality. Is that a correct word? The universe is emotionally normal. The earth is already seeking freedom and emancipation, but not from man. And man now has a chance to choose his existential adaptation. Do we build up the armor, or do we harvest the plasma emotional energy of the plasma universe the way the vertical people have? I'm not seeing any rockets and guns going off in the garden here. So our pursuit of happiness is actually a launch field failure, and it's a failure of choice with respect to our emotion of position. We have never launched a rocket into outer space. We are not able to go into outer space at this point in time, except for the fact that 100% of the souls born here preferred the bountifulness of Earth space as opposed to Mars space. So what is the thing here? The thing is there's an emotional position map that follows the feeding radiance and the feedback radiance, which is the balance of the dynamic plasma fields between the magnetic and gravitational field forces that transcend the reality dimensions that we are part of. And so we have to understand that there's a sequence, and this sequence takes more into account than we seem to be prepared to take into account, because it involves the soul of the sun and the soul of the earth. That has priority over the soul of the man. And so it's from there that we converge. And now that we have the soul of the man, we have to have a place. And so the soul of the solar system and the soul of the sun have attracted the soul of the earth. Oh, well, now we have a place. Okay, well, this is good. So the place is a priority. And so it's the soul of the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth that attracts the soul of the earth body. Okay, so now that we have an earth body, now we can have our soul of the earth body, because our soul of the man interacts with the soul of the earth body and attracts the soul of the body. Okay, well, this is good. And this is all done in the plasma sequencing. And it's part of the materialization. So the soul of the sun body plus the soul of the earth body manifests the physicality of the earth. So the physicality of the earth is the byproduct of the fields of inertia. Well, this is good. Now we have a place to go. And so here we are. The soul of our body and the soul of the earth manifest the soul of our body. And that's where we have established this gravitational stability. And so we've done this through magnetical stability. And we're going to use that and demonstrate this as we go to Mars. We could have gone to Mars, but we didn't have this emotional connection to Mars. We wanted to go to heaven. Who doesn't want to go to heaven? So we made a choice before we got here, didn't we? We made this choice. You say, well, when did I make this choice? Well, your preference and sentimentality was a choice, and you chose to be born. That's one. And you were born by choosing the outer space system. That's two. And you were born into this inner space by default, and this inner space is part of this round trip on Earth space. It's part of our round trip. And a round trip from where? Well, from where we came from to here, and from here, where we're going. And we now have choices because our choices determine our emotional position. And so we have to clearly understand what we are and what we are not. And we have to understand that we are inherently peaceful. So if we want to expand our horizons, we have to understand how the rest of the universe works. And so there is no tug of war between the laws of man and the universal law. That's a fabrication of our Earth space. When we look at the plasma science, this is where the science meets the soul of man for peace and can transcend all of the nations so that, you know, we're part of the Earth family. There are no bounds. And since we're in the post-December 16th era, where we can make choices and we can see the difference between outer space, inner space, and Earth space, and how we can transcend all of these spaces and do this gracefully and also safely. And so on February the 19th, which is just down the road, 7 days from now, guess who's coming for dinner? It's an open invitation. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're calling all Earth space patriots. Make that conscious choice that you've already made unconsciously. That is to be Earth space patriots. And you can only do this with the World Peace Treaty. And you have different choices or all of the above. Sign it with a pen, sign it with your heart, sign it with your soul. All of the above. Because space has overlapping fields of life. And these are life choices free from boundaries or abuse. And the emotional position map is of the universal community. And the universal community is your travel guide. And so our earthbound physical and emotional transformation is manifest gravitationally, and as such becomes gravitationally stable by enhancing the vitality the way you were fed from the universe originally. So we can make that transmutation connection from that transparency point where we don't know where we came from to that manifestation point to wherever we are. And the connection that is there because it's an adaptation and awareness, and it's part of this inner space emotional construct. And that construct connects equally to the universal broadcast of the inner space of freedom. It's a universal broadcast, all channels. So the soul of the body sequencing has adapted with and chooses man's morality. Do we get to choose man's morality? Well, the wise man said, you better choose wisely. The plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. Thank you all for participating. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Thank you, Alex, for sharing more of your understanding. It certainly is deep, and I've got a ways to go to catch up. It seems I'm behind in all areas, but I know there'll be a way where we're going to understand more. I guess it's little by little and testing it. And this way we'll have I know he stressed confidence, that we need to gain more confidence in our understandings, but it does sound like you have a lot of confidence in your understanding. So thank you for sharing it with all of us. Usually I ask at this time if there's anyone new who hasn't been here before, but looking through the list, I think everyone's been here before, some more often than others. I was pleased to see Nikolai here with us today. I'm sure he has a few stories to tell, or may have some questions to ask as well. And let's see if we can open it up to the floor or to the participants and see if they have any questions for Alex. That's what we usually start with. You could have overwhelmed them again, Alex. Wow. Now, in the video we were watching, Mr. Kesh said you could be in two positions if you understand this, and if you apply it, I suppose, you could be in two positions. Now, this Herman Weil, he's saying that, well, maybe they are different energies, but if you're in two places at the same time, is that the same energy? It's your energy. Obviously, you'd be aware of both places at the same time. I know I asked Mr. Kesh this probably a number of years ago, and he said, no, that's only reserved for the creator to be in two places at the same time. But maybe we weren't ready to hear that we are the creator and equal to the creator. That we can also, if we learn this, be in two places at the same time. And it's not just here on Earth. I think you can be maybe working out in the universe and also be here present on Earth. So this would be a fantastic understanding to achieve this, maybe in the coming time, perhaps. Do you want to make any comments on that, Alex?
Sure. I'm going to be talking about more of that next week, and then
Okay.
hopefully
We can save it then.
Well, no, it's just that hopefully I'm going to be relevant because we go to two places every night when we go to sleep. You know, our physicality goes in a bed, and our soul says, "Okay, we're carrying on." But the thing is, in the morning, the soul knows to come back to the body, and is very accurate and precise in its return, and it does this safely. So
And
we
it doesn't seem to have trouble with the GPS. It doesn't land in someone else's body, does it?
exactly. So are we talking about the energy that is moving, or are we talking about the residue of the energy? Because the key point is that wherever you are in a field. So this is the difference between the plasma science and the other science. When you're looking at the other science, you know, we're talking about electrons, protons, or neutrons, you know, atoms and things like that. But when we talk about a field, we're not saying where that field is. We're not saying how big it is. And any field has to have an absorption and emission spectrum. Has to have. It cannot not have it. Without the emission and the absorption, it cannot maintain its field strength. And it has three ways to do this. It can either increase in strength, decrease in strength, or maintain like a catalytic condition where it can exchange energy. But in all three of those cases, it can exchange energy. And then the question is, in relationship to what else? And so if you have a launch point that is your field strength, your launch point comes from a field, and you have a destination field. And in that destination field, you have a destination point. Okay, so in all cases, the point is inside the field. You have to have the two fields. Okay, so what's in between? Book number 2, the link. The point.
I thought the
That's
link was
point.
these little scouts you would send out, perhaps by the thousand, he said, that you could send out sort of these little scouts, and depending on where you wanted to go, you could connect with them in a way.
Yeah. So that scout is that scout a spy, or is he a traitor?
No, you sent it out from your soul to many
Right.
different positions.
Right. Absolutely. So that's your scout. And so where is he going? He's going to that point of reference that he has an emotional connection to. Without that emotional connection, he can never make the physical connection. So that's the point of today's discussion.
Yeah, but we've not been many places in the universe, or maybe the soul has in its travels. It's quite familiar with the universe. And we just have to send those little scouts ahead, and everything will start to happen.
See, that's a really good point, Mark. You brought up a terrific point. So wherever we came from was not within this solar system, was it? Because there's no other place on this solar system like Earth. Would you agree?
That I'm aware of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay. But Earth has a specific characteristic. And so wherever we came, we all came here. There's no discussion about that. We're here. And so we made a choice. We came here as opposed to there. And so it's based on that criteria. So if we send out a scout, we're going to send it with that criteria. And that criteria is going to be arriving at something that matches, something that can absorb.
So were we created here, or did we send a scout to Earth, and then we connected with that and brought ourselves here in a way? I know the universal traveler has totally forgot how he got here and how to get back home.
I hear a cricket wanting to answer.
Thank you. I'm sorry he's so loud. He's the loudest cricket I've ever heard. He's probably ringing a bell. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask again. I think I've asked you before, but when we are created in the image of the creator, that means we have every position anywhere and everywhere. Infinite possibilities are already with us. Isn't that true? And so once we learn how to use that, then we can go anywhere. We already got our GPS set up. And I thought it was part of the C14 issue of communicating and everything else. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Well, let's put it this way. There are a lot of sports fans, and so they would support their team within a league. And would you, if you're going to the game, which game are you going to go to? You can go to any game, can't you? Because it's in your league. But you're going to go to one game. You're going to go to a specific game, and you're going to make that choice. So although we have a connection with all the teams in the league, it doesn't mean we go to all the games all the time. We can go to this game or that game and we make a choice. Even if you're looking at the highlights on your TV or whatever, you get to choose, which ones you want to look at. I don't want to look at that game. Those are two lousy teams. I've seen them play, not interested. I want to go to another thing. So here it's the same. It's the same with the creator, but we have the creator's capability. This is the difference. So you're 100% correct. We have the capability of the creator, but we also have the choices. And so that becomes a key point, because whenever we go somewhere, it would be really, really good if we were there on time. Because if the game is on Sunday and I show up on Saturday, not going to be anybody there. And then if I show up on Monday, well, the game's over. So, you want to be on time. And so we're having dinner with the creator next week. And so we need to be there on time. And we expect others who want to do the same thing to also be there on time. And it's just each of them makes a choice. And so this is done on the soul level, because the souls have the capability of being anywhere. Isn't that true? In your life, let's say you're a traveler, and as a matter of fact, you're just a member on this panel. And so you know that we are representing different countries from all over the world. So clearly, you know that you can be in any country. And so you've made a choice to be in a certain country. And this meeting, which country is this meeting in? Really? I'm from Canada. Mark is from the US. So, which country is this meeting in? So this meeting is in planet Earth. And not only because planet Earth is part of something else. And so the connection is connected to another connection, is connected to another connection. So the grandkids are connected not only to the parents, but to the grandparents and the great-grandparents. And so that becomes part of the family. But it's not only biological, it's emotional as well. So if it can be emotional and physical, well, in some cases that would be stronger, but not necessarily, because we all have these choices, and these choices are at the root of free will. And free will is important. And so we see that some people have made very bad choices, because one of those choices is to tell the creator to leave us alone. And that's not a good choice. So is our choice dependent on whether other people are choosing? No, you have that choice. You have that capability. And I'm saying here right now, we all made a choice to be here today. And so the question is, when did we make that choice? And why did we make that choice? And so I'm just going to propose the reason we made that choice was to clean up the mess. And when did we make that choice? Well, obviously before we were born. So that's the answer to your question. Yes. So that connection came from the creator. So by extension, it must have been his choice as well. Is that helpful?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding my arrow here. Yes, it was very helpful. I like that analogy, because a lot of people like games and watching sports. So it's a great example. Thanks for that.
Thank you for your question, and I thank you for your ongoing participation.
And thanks for recognizing that. Thank you.
Are you going to share with us where did these moons come from, Jupiter? I know Rick brought it up. I don't think we opened it up much. But is it like, I remember Mr. Kesh talking about asteroids coming into the Earth, and he said sometimes we don't pick them up because of the fact that they're there, but they're in the energy dimension. They're not in the matter state. And when they come close to the fields of this planet or within the fields of this planet, then they manifest in the physicality. And we say, wow, where did this thing come from? We didn't even have a clue it was there. So are the moons the same way? I'm thinking about nanocoding, and until it gets to a certain number of layers, it's there, but we can't see it. And after it hits, what is it, the 10,000 or somewhere in that area, you can start to see the nanocoding. Did science matter, man's knowledge, did they give any explanation of that? Was it objects that it just pulled into itself? Are they spherical, just like a shape of similar to a shape of a plasma? They're not all spherical, but that's the general shape of a plasma for the most part. If we think of moons and other things like that, how did they manifest to the vision of the physicality? I'm sure we look at Jupiter weekly. I don't, but the scientists do. And was this an ongoing were there any explanations? Just wondering.
Are you asking me for an explanation, Mark?
If you have it, yeah. I don't know what was explained or how it was explained. It seems like 12 appearing. You said it added an additional 12 moons, right?
Yeah, because it came within the field of vision. So, if we don't have the magnification and capability of seeing
Okay.
that, right? But also a lot has to do with the disclosure. There are a lot of things that they see that's going on that they don't explain to us.
Okay, we're
right?
too young to be explained in the science world.
When you grow up, anyway, you're too young to know, right? So that's the first thing. I can always default to that, answer that the professor would give you and say, well, I don't know. We know we're still looking for those answers. But I really don't like to do that. One of the reasons for these classes is because we need to sort it out. And we don't need a PhD to do this. We need to understand the rules of the game. That's the most important thing, okay? So it's not the number on your uniform. It's the player in the uniform. And so what I'm saying here is that if you look at the reference of the Earth's crust, we have peaks and valleys. So that's not very round. But unless you're close to the Earth, you actually can't even see the atmosphere. So would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that's the case with the asteroids. Maybe we can't see the atmosphere. So the manifestation of what we can see is part physical and the other part is plasmatic. So it would be kind of like a clairvoyant would be looking at you, but they would see your aura. But someone who's not clairvoyant would only see your physicality. So a clairvoyant would say, well, you're living in an egg. You're inside an egg. If you look at the New Age books and spiritual books, they'll talk about your egg dimension, but clearly you have fingers and you have a nose, and you have lanky arms and gangly legs. So it's clearly not round. So it's you within, and even when you look at an X-ray, you see the bones, and clearly they're bony. So they're not round either. The point I'm trying to say here is that there are fields, energy fields that are non-visible, non-tangible, and these are plasmatic fields that are support structure for the physical fields. But we spoke about in the past about the somatoscope, which could see living blood culture. So the difference that they do in the hospitals, they'll take a blood sample and they'll look at it under a microscope, and they're basically looking at a photograph. And so, you know, if I show you a photograph, you don't see the action of what is coming to at that point in time or what is going on thereafter. You know, it's like looking at a ball and a wall, and you say, well, is the ball going towards the wall or is the ball bouncing from the wall? Well, you can't tell from a photograph. So that's the difference between a photograph and a motion picture. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious. So when you're looking at a somatoscope, it's actually seeing a blood culture in motion. And so it is from there that we could actually see the, shall we say, shall we say, the transmogrification of the bacteria and the virus, where by changing the pH, you change the bacteria into a virus, and then you could change that virus back into a bacteria. And Gassenasus, who invented the somatoscope, did this 40 times in a row by accident. So it's obviously not an accident. The first time was the accident. The other 39 times were proof of concept. So you could do that willfully and skillfully, and that microscope is illegal. So why would scientific evidence, which requires verification and validation from man-made means, be illegal? So the reason given, of course, is because it's not physical. It's a fabrication of some mystical forces that have shown how the blood is operating, so it's not accepted. But as we see, the real reason, of course, is the 125,000 magnification. That makes a big difference. And so maybe we can see the planet, but we can't see the moons, which is what I'm alluding to. But what I'm really alluding to is the fact that with these excursions on December the 16th and January the 20th, we've seen the oscilloscope with a representation of field forces, and there was an interpretation of these field forces. And so the first question comes to my mind, wait a second, if we're talking about soul travel, and here we have a physical manifestation on an oscilloscope of visible light, how does that work? And so the answer given, of course, was that this is a new device, a new man-made device that is following the criteria of scientific verification and validation by man-made means, right? And so that was done. And furthermore, on December the 16th, we've seen the collective effect of the 160 passengers. But the picture that was shown on January the 20th was of one single traveler. Same oscilloscope, same patterns, same colors, but a different cause. And the only person who knew that cause was the included in the group of the people who were doing the testing. So you as an observer would say, oh, well, the test results on December the 16th and those on the January 20th were the same. Well, now what happens if, because of our lack of understanding, if someone were to step forward and say, well, you know, that device that Mr. Kesh made is going to be rendered illegal? What happens then? They've done it before, and they could do it again. Well, that is just a test device that is testing what has been possible. It's what has been possible which is going to be manifest. So, first of all, tomorrow is going to be an exciting manifestation. Worldwide broadcast of the new plasma energy units. Next Sunday, a very special dinner. And then the following day, I don't know. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, can we hear from someone else besides myself? We'd like to hear another voice open up, if you like to. And what are your thoughts, Alex, on the nuclear power plants who are generating, he was saying, as much or energies outside of the walls of the power plant? And I guess we're doing a very similar thing. I know we're low energy nuclear reactors, probably stronger than that, but these power plants have energy around the outside walls. I'm surprised it's never been confirmed or tested or anything, but we're also generating fields around us in a similar manner, I think, like the power plant, but not harmful per se. Any thoughts on what you heard, Mr. Kesh, if you did hear that part?
Yes, I did hear that part, and I was
Okay.
really gratified to hear that part, okay? Because especially here in Ontario, where I'm situated, the home of one of the biggest energy conspirators on this planet, not making commentary here, okay? Just
Okay.
saying. They have constantly downplayed the electromagnetic effect from transmission lines. And of
Okay.
course,
Just in your power lines outside your house and things, or what's
yeah,
running
there's
through the walls. Okay.
There's no effect, right?
Electromagnetic. Okay. Field.
Yeah, no effect. That's what they say. And the same, applies to cell phones, right?
Uh-huh.
And TVs and all of this stuff. But then you get into the higher energy fields of the nuclear reactor, and you say, well, we have this nuclear reactor that's on the borderline of this, like especially in Toronto, we have two that are just outside of Toronto, and the immediate city that is adjacent to it is called Oshawa. And, they're saying, well, there's no effect. Well, we're talking about a field strength and a nuclear reactor that is, many orders of magnitude stronger than the electromagnetic effect. Well, how can there not be an effect, when the neighbors are sitting right next door? So what it means is that if you have a gravitational point, you have to have a magnetical point. And the stronger the gravitational point, the more, in other words, more stable, then its magnetical counterpart must be the same. Must be. So if it's gravitationally stable, the magnetical stability must be there. But a nuclear reaction, the way it's been working, is not stable on its own. It's a series of repetitions. And so you get a series of repetitious reactions, and they're stable. And so the series of repetitions are magnetically stable. So however you want to cut it, whether it's, one field or it's a field of impulses, it's all working the same way. And so the stronger it is, the stronger its effect must be around. So let's talk about two observations here. One was Mr. Kesh's job to determine the safe location of the testing equipment in England. And he found that the island wasn't big enough, which is why they shut the only reactor down in England. Well, if England is not big enough, then I'll tell you what, a kilometer down the road from, our nuclear reactor is not far enough automatically, right? So,
Alex, it wasn't England, it was London, St. Mary's.
yeah, but
Oh. That was a university reactor, I think he was.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
what he had shut down.
But he did say that 100,000 people were becoming sick from it, and if we knew how to tap into it, we could feed 100,000 people with that energy, or to use it in a different way. I'm not exactly sure what he meant, but it was eventually closed.
because on its own it was gravitationally stable as a collective, but individually it was not stable. It was highly reactive. So there was a consumption. We consume these fuel rods, right? So it is different from the energy from the sun. The sun is catalytic. A nuclear station is consumption.
And while John has his mic open, I know you asked a question in the last workshop, John, and how did you
Two
take?
questions.
Okay, yeah, but the one where you said, is there really a nuclear explosion? How did you
Yeah,
interpret the answer on that? If I could just divert over to you for
No,
a
I
moment.
did. I have to listen to it again because
Right.
I didn't get it right. But I've had this question in my pocket for quite a while now because the info I had is, and if you look at the mushrooms produced with the atomic bombs, that's produced by a zero point energy. The same as the experiments the Americans did when they were testing the first bombs in the desert and on the sea. They told the soldiers to put their backs towards the bombs and don't look at the flash of the light. But then if those were reactive, they had atomic reaction, they would have gotten burnt, like supposedly the Japanese were burnt. But the Japanese were burnt more by the explosion than by atomic energy, apparently, because they've gone back to their cities.
Right. I thought the soldiers did get a reddish skin, and they said, "Oh, that's just like a sunburn. You don't need
Yeah,
to
but
pay much attention there."
A direct hit by atomic energy, it would have taken off the skin and all your clothes off.
Yeah, he was talking about angles, and that was a very important thing of the way it interacts or intersects with your physicality. On certain angles, it'll go right through. On other angles, it will
Exactly
interfere.
the same
Yeah.
as the X-ray, he said.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you've seen these films they've shown lately of those experiments done in the 1940s, it's very clear. You got what, 500 or 1,000 soldiers or sailors putting their backs towards the atomic bomb, and they're there. They've lived through it.
Yeah, but eventually it will lead to the decentralization of power production. I think this is what Mr. Kesh is saying. We don't need these huge reactors anymore when we can decentralize and also feed back to a substation or a power plant 4 or 5 times as much as we're consuming.
Yeah,
so this is a beautiful loop.
There are other there are other atomic energy plants that work on other materials, and they're not as dangerous. The thing is, they've needed these elements for the bombs. That's why they made these plants out of uranium and plutonium.
So there's another thing that I'd like to add, if I may.
Yes, go ahead. We're all learning from each other a bit.
Yeah, we sure are. It's wonderful. It's about Fukushima. So we know that many of the farmers around Fukushima were hurt by the Fukushima fallout. But within a short period of time, the people who were looking after that plant, and they had to wear this special equipment, the photo images clearly showed that the cars that were driving the employees, that were delivering the employees to the plant, were parked right outside, just like you would park at your, your local
Your home,
supermarket.
yeah.
And the people were coming out of their cars in street clothes and going inside the plant in street clothes. So, and then obviously inside the plant, they would be converted to their shielded clothing. But the point is that this was declared a disaster zone. And so what happened in between? And so that was the work that Mr. Kesh did to neutralize the Fukushima disaster. And what was critical about this, well, first of all, the amazement that that was done. Well, that is consistent with the story with what we did in England, right? So there was no place in England that was safe from that reactor. And so obviously the same would have been true with Fukushima. But here the employees were able to go in. And so what was the mitigating factor? One factor was that Mr. Cash was part of the research in England, and Mr. Cash was part of the plasma delivery system at Fukushima. And what also was consistent was that we don't know the cause, not publicly. We still have the damage to the population, and we have no explanation why the plant is back in operation. And furthermore, we have no public explanation of why they were allowed to dump the so-called radioactive water back into the Pacific Ocean, when we know clearly that the radioactive effect was actually recorded on the west coast of North America. So when we're talking about the field effect, there's the field effect within the field, and then there's the transmission of the residue to another place. And so exactly what John was alluding to, the stability, where we could actually, instead of making it volatile, we could make it very stable. And we can dissipate the nuclear effect. And we are on standby as a Kesh Foundation in case of a disaster. Right. We're on standby to be able to neutralize that within a matter of days. And still publicly, they acknowledge that it's, we're talking about a 20,000 year nuclear decay cycle. Well, I know the difference between 20,000 years and a few days. So there's an inconsistency there. And if there's anything that is more blatant in this whole exercise, is the consistency of the teachings of Mr. Kesh. Very consistent, very stable.
Yes, it was a beautiful system he provided. Apparently, they encapsulated the radioactivity, and it was still there, as I understand it, but it was not allowed to interact with the environment. So it was very nice. And then I guess the tanks could be the same way we do with the Ganses. It's only the bottom part that was the highly contaminated, but the rest of the water could be released.
Okay, so we have Choices, and the atomic group there had Choices, and you can see the difference in the choices that they chose.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're still having these problems. So it's not like it's hidden. You can't be more public than we are. And you know that the thing is that we're not in a confrontational point. This is not a matter of conflict. It's a matter of preferences and choices, and our choice is peace and prosperity. So we have to do that in a peaceful and prosperous manner. That's how it works.
Okay, we're almost approaching midnight in Europe, and I think we're going to, but let's see if anyone else would like to make a point or raise a question or add a comment here. I know there's a tremendous amount of knowledge we haven't gotten, as he said, to the first step and the real understanding of this, but we're moving in the correct direction. So let's see if anyone else would like to add something. Otherwise, I'll play the new tomorrow and the final disclaimer. I want to thank you, Alex, again for your consistency and sharing what you understand about this technology, this knowledge, which it's endless. So we've got a ways to go, but we're approaching it.
Well, I want to thank you much for all your work, Mark, and I want to thank all the panelists for allowing me to present. This is all part of the Kesh Foundation, and we're all, you know, contributing together. So stay tuned for the next exciting episode, and we'll pick up where we left off next week.
Okay, thank you all for joining. And again, in what is it, 10 hours or so, the next meeting will commence at the Energy Blueprint Day. So we invite all of you to be there and on your Zoom or your YouTube, or just be there on the soul level and we can all review it. But this is really a world premiere of technology that's never been seen or demonstrated before on this planet. So we're at the pinnacle of understanding, not only here, apparently, even across the universe, of what's about to take place. So thank you all for being with us today and adding your field strength to the meeting. And again, thank you very much, Alex, for carrying the bulk of the load for our meeting.
Yes, and I want to thank Gail and her contributions there, because we all want to know what we're made of.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank each and every one of you for continuing to bring the knowledge in whatever way you can. I think it'll become more apparent as we move into the next weeks and months ahead, and the picture will become clearer, maybe not totally, but where Mr. Kesh is taking all of us. So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, or morning.